They laughed first. That was the strangest part of it all. When the alien fleet arrived above Earth, blotting out the sun with shapes that bent the air around them, humanity expected fire. We expected death. What we didn't expect was mockery. The transmission came in every language at once, perfectly translated, smooth and calm. Your resistance is symbolic. Your weapons are obsolete. This world will be processed. And then they laughed again. The Virex Dominion had crossed 3 star systems to reach Earth. Their ships were alive with light, floating like gods above the atmosphere. Human satellites died in seconds. Defense grids went blind. Drones fell from the sky like dead insects. Every modern system failed as if it had been turned off by a single thought. Humanity's best technology collapsed in under an hour. Panic followed. Governments scattered. Military commands fractured. Cities burned where orbital strikes tested the planet's defenses like a child poking a toy. And still, the Virex laughed. They broadcast images of Earth's weapons museums. Old warships rusting in harbors. Steel giants turned into tourist attractions. Children waving from decks that hadn't fired a real shot in decades. These are your symbols of power, the aliens mocked. Artifacts. Relics. Memory without threat. That was when Commander Elias Rowe stopped listening. Rowe wasn't important anymore. Not officially. He had retired 12 years earlier, his name buried under newer, shinier officers with cleaner records and digital command chairs. He lived near the coast, close enough to hear the sea, far enough to be forgotten. When the invasion began, Rowe was inside a maritime preservation yard. He volunteered there twice a week. Most people thought he was crazy. The ships were old. Massive steel skeletons tied to concrete docks. Battleships built when war meant proximity, smoke, and human hands turning metal wheels. When decisions were made face to face, not by algorithms. Rowe stood on the deck of the HMS Valor, a decommissioned battleship turned museum piece, as the sky burned orange above the horizon. He watched a modern destroyer explode in silence miles away. And then he smiled. Of course they don't understand, he muttered. Around him, a handful of civilians froze in fear. Mechanics. Retired sailors. Students earning volunteer hours. No one knew what to do anymore. Rowe turned to them. Tell me, he asked calmly, do you know why these ships were never replaced? No one answered. Because they were finished, he said. Not optimized. Not upgraded. Finished. Built to survive mistakes. Another explosion rolled across the sea. Rowe tapped the steel railing beneath his hand. No networks, he continued. No AI cores. No remote control. Nothing for them to hack. The laughter echoed again from the sky. That night, Rowe made a call on an analog radio that hadn't been used since the Cold War. The signal traveled quietly. No satellites. No encryption. Just human voices passing coordinates, instructions, and a single question. Can you still make her sail? Across the world, in forgotten docks and abandoned yards, people answered. Yes. The Virex Dominion began landfall operations on day 3. Their dropships hovered above cities, scanning populations, mapping resistance, deciding which regions would be harvested first. They didn't rush. They had time. They always did. What they didn't expect was movement from the coast. The HMS Valor broke free from her moorings at dawn. Smoke poured from her stacks like a waking beast. Rusted engines screamed in protest, then settled into a deep, angry rhythm. Volunteers ran cables by hand. Turrets turned slowly, manually, metal grinding against metal. No digital targeting systems lit up. No signals were emitted. To the Virex sensors, the ship barely existed. High above, an alien observer vessel drifted over the ocean, cataloging human infrastructure. Its commander barely noticed the heat bloom from the old battleship's boilers. Until the first shell hit. The projectile wasn't fast by alien standards. It wasn't elegant. It didn't glow. It was just steel, momentum, and fury. The shell slammed into the observer vessel's underside and detonated inside its unshielded hull. The explosion tore the ship open from within, scattering molten fragments across the sky. The Virex commander never finished screaming. Silence followed. Then confusion. Then panic. Across the Virex command network, alarms began to cascade. Error. Impact source unknown. No energy signature detected. Primitive kinetic weapon successful. The laughter stopped. On the deck of the Vela, men and women stared upward in disbelief as flaming debris rained into the sea. Someone laughed instead. A short, breathless, human laugh. Rowe lowered his binoculars. "Load the next shell," he said. Behind him, more ships began to move. Old names returned to the sea. Forgotten hulls cut through the water once more. Battleships, cruisers, relics reborn. The Virex Dominion had come expecting a clean conquest. They had found something else. They had found humanity, cornered, angry, and creative. And the relics they mocked were waking up. The Virex Dominion did not retreat. That surprised many of us later, when historians would replay the recordings and study the data. By every logical calculation, the aliens should have pulled back, regrouped, reassessed the threat. But logic was not the Virex weakness. Pride was. Above Earth, the shattered remains of their observer vessel still burned through the upper atmosphere. The Dominion command labeled the incident an anomaly. A statistical error. A lucky hit by an extinct weapon type. They told themselves it would not happen again. Commander Threx of the Virex 3rd Expansion Fleet watched the data scroll across his vision bands, his irritation sharpening into something close to anger. He had overseen the conquest of 7 inhabited worlds. None of them had struck back after the initial suppression phase. Especially not with museum artifacts. Redirect strike patterns, Threx ordered. Identify the kinetic source and remove it. From orbit, sleek alien warships adjusted their positions. Energy lances charged. Targeting arrays searched for electronic emissions, power spikes, signal traffic. They found nothing. Below, the ocean was quiet. Too quiet. The HNS Vela moved without lights, guided by stars and coastline memory. Her crew worked in near silence, communicating with hand signals and shouted commands when engines roared too loud. No one cheered anymore. The first kill had shocked them all. Now reality set in. They were at war. Lena Ortiz wiped grease from her hands and leaned against a bulkhead, breathing hard. She had been an auto mechanic before the invasion. Never touched a warship in her life. Now she was part of the engine crew, keeping 70-year-old machinery alive with scavenged parts and stubborn will. "They're going to come for us," she said quietly. Rowe nodded. "Good." She stared at him. "Good." "They still think like conquerors," he replied. "That means they'll focus on us instead of everyone else." Above deck, lookout crews reported movement in the sky. 3 Virex destroyers peeled away from orbit, descending like falling knives. Their hulls shimmered with energy shields that had shrugged off human missiles days earlier. On the Vela, the main guns rotated. Slowly, painfully. Human hands strained against cranks. Sweat mixed with rust. Every movement took effort. Time. Time the Virex believed humans no longer had. The first alien strike hit the water a kilometer short, turning the sea into steam. The second passed overhead, slicing clouds apart with light. The third would have killed them. It missed. Not because the Virex aimed poorly, but because the Vela turned, not sharply, not efficiently, but unpredictably. A clumsy shift driven by old hydraulics and instinct, not computers. The energy lance burned past empty ocean. "Fire!" someone screamed. The guns answered. Shells roared skyward, tearing through air without elegance or precision. One missed wide. Another glanced off a shield and detonated harmlessly. The third struck true. The impact didn't pierce the shield. It overloaded it. The Virex destroyer's defenses collapsed inward for a fraction of a second, just long enough for the fourth shell to slam into exposed hull. The alien ship split apart like brittle glass. Commander Threx watched the feed in disbelief. That should not be possible, he hissed. But it was happening. Across the globe, more signals reached him. Reports of ancient human vessels moving again. Not one or two. Dozens. Relics rising from scrapyards. From riverbeds. From forgotten harbors. Ships that had no place on a modern battlefield, yet were surviving it. The Virex adapted quickly. They always did. They shifted tactics. Instead of overwhelming force, they began surgical strikes. Targeting supply routes. Fuel stores. Repair yards. They attacked coastal cities to draw the relic ships out into the open. And sometimes, it worked. The HNS Resolute never made it past the bay. A focused orbital beam cut her in half before her guns could elevate. Hundreds died in seconds. The ocean swallowed their names. On the Vela, silence followed the news. That night, no one slept. Lena sat beside the hull, listening to the creak of metal and the distant thunder of war. She thought of her brother, last seen in a refugee convoy that never arrived. She didn't cry. Not anymore. Ro joined her. "They're learning," she said. "Yes," he replied. "Which means they're afraid." Fear spread fast. The Virex Dominion had never faced an enemy that welcomed loss. Every destroyed human ship became a symbol, not a warning. Every wreck turned into a rallying cry. People stopped waiting for orders. They just acted. Fishermen turned spotters. Ham radio operators became intelligence hubs. Factory workers forged shell casings by hand. Students ran ammunition lines under fire. No central command. No single leader. Just humanity, moving together like a storm. The Virex struggled to model it. Their simulations failed again and again. Humans did not retreat when outmatched. They closed in. The next major clash came at dusk near the shattered remains of an offshore energy platform. 3 relic ships lay in wait, engines silent, guns angled skyward. Above them, a Virex carrier descended, confident and alone. Commander Threx watched through remote feed, certain this would end the anomaly. The carrier fired first. The sea exploded. 1 relic ship vanished in fire. The second took a direct hit and burned. The third remained. Barely floating. Barely alive. "Finish it," Threx ordered. But the carrier drifted closer. Too close. From the wreckage below, hidden hatches opened. Small craft surged forward, not ships, but boats. Loaded with explosives. Piloted by volunteers who knew they would not return. They struck the carrier's underside where its shields were weakest. The explosion crippled its engines. Then the last relic ship fired everything it had left. The carrier fell from the sky like a dying star. Threx screamed. Across the Dominion fleet, something changed. The humans were not winning. But they were not losing either. And worse. They were enjoying the fight. The laughter never returned. By the end of the week, the Virex Dominion issued its first classified update. Human resistance classified as anomalous threat. Primitive assets demonstrate unacceptable effectiveness. On Earth, no one saw the report. But they felt it. In the way the skies hesitated. In the way alien ships kept their distance. In the way old warships, scarred, burning, unstoppable, kept sailing. Humanity had not been conquered. Not yet. And the relics still had something to say. The Virex Dominion had a word for war. It translated loosely into inevitable motion. Every conflict they had ever fought followed patterns. Resistance rose. Resistance broke. Order replaced chaos. Their simulations were flawless because their enemies were predictable. Humans were not. That realization settled heavily inside Commander Threx as he studied the latest tactical projections. Every model collapsed after one constant appeared again and again. Human choice. Not strategy. Not technology. Choice. The humans did not retreat when logic demanded it. They did not consolidate forces when efficiency required it. They did not protect resources the way any rational species would. They protected people. And they destroyed themselves to do it. That made no sense. On Earth, the sky had changed. Not visually. Not yet. But people could feel it. The Virex fleet hovered farther away now, like predators circling prey that had learned to bite back. Their strikes were fewer, more calculated. When they attacked, they hit hard and vanished. The Relic fleet adapted in its own way. They never stayed in one place for long. Old battleships drifted between fog banks, river mouths, and broken coastlines. Crews learned to read wind and tide like ancient sailors, hiding in plain sight. No algorithms. Just instinct. Lena Ortiz hadn't slept properly in days. Her hands were cracked and bleeding from rewiring engines that should have failed decades ago. Every time the Vela's turbines shuddered, she whispered threats to the metal like it could hear her. Somehow, it listened. Above deck, Commander Rowe watched volunteers load shells forged in an abandoned steel mill. They weren't perfect. They didn't need to be. Perfection was for machines. Humans used enough. A transmission crackled through the analog radio, faint, distorted, human. Relic Group, this is Harbor Cell 7. Virex scouts inbound. 30 minutes. Rowe nodded. Understood. He turned to the crew. Same plan. No one asked questions. The scouts came low and fast, their hulls shimmering as they scanned for digital signatures. They found none. Below them, the Vela drifted dead in the water, looking exactly like what it was meant to look like. A corpse. The first scout passed overhead. The second slowed. The third hesitated. That was enough. From the shadows of the coastline, two smaller Relic ships surged forward, guns firing at point-blank range. The scouts scattered, shocked by the sudden violence. One escaped. That was intentional. Let it tell the others. Let fear spread. In orbit, Commander Threx received the scouts' fractured report. Visual confirmation of human tactics. Ambush. Bait. Sacrifice. Threx's mandibles tightened. These are not warriors, one of his aides said. They are animals. No, Threx replied quietly. They are worse. The Virex response came days later. Not against ships. Against hope. Orbital platforms repositioned over population centers that had been spared so far. No warning broadcasts. No mockery. Just silence. Then sound. A low-frequency harmonic pulse rolled across the land. It didn't destroy buildings. It didn't burn cities. It broke minds. People collapsed screaming. Blood poured from ears. Animals panicked and fled. Entire refugee camps fell into chaos as the sound crawled inside skulls and refused to leave. On the Vela, crew members dropped to their knees, clutching their heads. Lena bit down on her sleeve to keep from screaming. Rowe stood his ground. Shut down engines, he ordered. All power off. Someone looked at him in disbelief. Sir, we'll be sitting ducks. We already are, he said. Trust me. The engines died. The sound faded. The pulse passed over them like a storm over a rock. The Virex platforms moved on, confident they had broken something essential. They were wrong. That night, survivors gathered in the dark. Not to mourn. To plan. People talked. Shared stories. Shared pain. Shared anger. There was no speech. No rallying cry. Just a quiet understanding. If this was the cost of fighting, they would pay it. Every time. Lena sat with a young deckhand named Malik, who stared at his shaking hands. I'm scared, he admitted. So am I, she said. Then why are we still here? She thought of the sky filled with alien ships. Of cities burning. Of her brother's empty name. Because fear doesn't get to choose for us, she answered. Malik nodded. And went back to work. The next engagement wasn't planned. It never was. A Virex logistics carrier drifted too close to the coastline, confident in its escorts and shielding. It was massive, slow, and full of supplies meant to sustain the invasion. The Relic fleet converged. 5 ships. Barely floating. Barely armed. Roe knew what it would cost. He gave the order anyway. They charged. The carrier's escorts tore into them with precision fire. One relic ship vanished in flame. Another lost power and drifted helplessly. The Vela took a hit that tore through her side, flooding compartments and killing 3 crew instantly. Lena barely escaped the engine room as water surged in. But they reached the carrier. Point blank. Every remaining gun fired. Shells punched into its hull. Fires spread inside alien corridors never meant to endure physical impact. Systems overloaded. Gravity failed. The carrier began to fall. Roe stayed on the bridge as alarms screamed. "Abandon ship," someone shouted. He shook his head. Not yet. The Vela fired one last shell directly into the carrier's core. The explosion lit the night like a second sun. Both ships were lost. But the carrier's destruction echoed across the Virex command network. For the first time in Dominion history, a supply line had been erased by primitives. Commander Threx stared at the damage report in silence. This war was no longer following any acceptable trajectory. The humans were not resisting conquest. They were changing it. Every loss fed them. Every sacrifice made them stronger. And worse. Other species were watching. Signals from neighboring systems spiked. Observers gathered at the edges of the conflict. They were no longer asking if humanity would survive. They were asking what it meant to face them. On Earth, as dawn rose over burning seas, Lena stood among survivors pulled from wreckage. The Vela was gone. Roe was gone. But the fight remained. And somewhere deep inside the Virex Dominion, fear took root. The war changed the moment the message came from space. It wasn't Virex. That alone made everyone freeze. For weeks, humanity had learned to read the silence between attacks. Virex ships moved like hunters, quiet, efficient, cruel. But this signal was different. Old. Weak. Careful. It arrived through the same forgotten frequencies humans were using. Analog. Narrowband. Almost polite. To the people of Earth, the voice said, trembling but clear. We are watching. No threats. No demands. Just truth. Across the globe, survivors leaned closer to radios powered by hand-cranked generators and scavenged batteries. We are the Kepri Union, the voice continued. We have observed the Dominion for centuries. We believed resistance was impossible. A pause. We were wrong. The Virex Dominion detected the transmission seconds later. Commander Threx felt something cold settle in his chest. Other species were not supposed to interfere. Fear had kept them obedient for generations. The Dominion's strength came not just from power, but from reputation. Humans were breaking that too. Threx ordered immediate suppression. Scouts spread out. Jamming fields activated. But the signal had already spread. And hope, once released, could not be recalled. Lena Ortiz listened from the deck of a half-repaired cruiser that no longer had a name. Its hull number was gone. Its flag burned away. But it floated. Barely. Around her stood people who should have been civilians. Teachers. Dock workers. Old sailors pulled back into purpose. They didn't cheer at the alien message. They listened. The Kepri cannot fight openly, the voice said. But we can share what the Dominion fears. A sharp intake of breath. They fear collapse. The voice explained what the Virex had hidden for centuries. Their ships were powerful, but centralized. Their command structure rigid. Their doctrine perfect, until disrupted. They do not understand decentralized war, the Kepri said. They cannot adapt to enemies who act without hierarchy. Someone laughed softly. That was humanity's specialty. The next phase of the war was not led by ships. It was led by people. Cells formed everywhere. No ranks. No uniforms. No symbols to target. Each group acted independently, guided by shared intent rather than orders. Hit. Disappear. Adapt. Human engineers learned to modify old shells with scavenged alien materials. Not to copy their technology, but to misuse it. Shield disruptors wired backwards. Energy sinks overloaded on impact. Ugly solutions. Effective ones. The relic fleet became something new. A myth. A rumor. Virex crews began reporting attacks that made no sense. Ships damaged without warning. Escorts destroyed by vessels that should not exist. Every human loss was answered by 2 acts of defiance. The Dominion tightened its grip. And broke it. Threx stood before the high tactical circle, his status fraying by the second. The humans are spreading instability, one elder hissed. Contain them. We cannot, Threx replied. Not without committing full planetary sterilization. Silence followed. That word had not been spoken in centuries. Another elder leaned forward. This world is not worth that cost. Threx hesitated. That was the mistake. They are teaching others how to fight us, he said carefully. If we fail here, the contagion spreads. The circle withdrew to deliberate. Threx knew what that meant. They were afraid. The betrayal came from Earth. A faction calling itself the Unified Restoration Authority emerged from underground bunkers untouched by the war. They claimed legitimacy, continuity, order. They broadcast openly. Independent resistance efforts must cease, their message declared. All armed assets are to submit to centralized command. Lena heard the speech and felt her stomach twist. Centralized command. Exactly what the Virex understood. Resistance leaders refused. The authority responded by selling information. Coordinates. Supply routes. Harbor locations. They believed surrender would save them. They were wrong. The Virex struck with surgical precision, guided by human hands. Relic ships burned in their docks. Safe havens vanished overnight. Hundreds died because someone believed obedience could replace courage. The news spread fast. So did the response. The authorities' bunkers went dark within 48 hours. No speeches. No trials. Just silence. Humanity did not forgive betrayal. Not anymore. Above Earth, something unprecedented happened. A Virex dread carrier broke formation. Its captain panicked. Human attacks had crippled its escorts. Supply lines were failing. Signals from command were delayed. Conflicting. For the first time, a Dominion vessel retreated without orders. That was all it took. Others followed. Not fleeing. Repositioning. The Dominion was fracturing. Observers from distant systems recorded everything. Species that had lived under Virex's shadow for generations watched humans bleed, adapt, and advance. And they remembered something old. Freedom. Lena stood at the edge of a makeshift command deck as a new plan took shape. Not a strategy. A gamble. The Kepri had shared one final secret before going silent. A weakness in the Dominion's command lattice. A single node that synchronized their fleets. Destroy it, and the invasion would collapse into chaos. Reaching it would require sacrifice. Volunteers stepped forward without hesitation. Lena among them. Someone asked if she was afraid. She thought of Ro. Of the Vela. Of cities screaming under alien sound weapons. Yes, she said. But fear doesn't get to decide. Commander Threx felt it before the alarm sounded. A disturbance. A ripple through the lattice. Human ships, no, craft, slipped through defensive gaps no simulation had predicted. Some were barely spaceworthy. Others were nothing more than armored shuttles packed with explosives. They didn't retreat when fired upon. They accelerated. Threx understood then. This was not a battle. It was a message. As the humans closed in on the command node, the galaxy watched. Every species. Every oppressed world. Because if humanity succeeded, the Dominion would bleed. And bleeding's empires could die. The Virex command node was not a fortress. That was the first lie the Dominion ever told itself. It was a belief, that nothing could ever reach it, that no enemy would be reckless enough to try. It floated far beyond Earth's orbit, wrapped in layered defenses and protected by fleets that had never known fear. Until now. Human craft burned as they pushed forward. Some exploded before firing a shot. Others vanished in silent flashes of light. No one turned back. Not one. Lena Ortiz gripped the harness inside a gutted shuttle held together by scavenged plating and stubborn hope. The hull screamed under pressure. Warning lights flickered uselessly. She ignored them. Around her, volunteers sat in silence. No prayers. No speeches. They had already said goodbye to the world. A young pilot glanced back. 30 seconds. Lena nodded. She thought of Earth. Of oceans reflecting alien fire. Of ships that should have stayed rusting in museums but chose to sail anyway. She smiled. Commander Threx watched the impossible unfold. Human vessels, primitive, mismatched, irrational, pierced the outer defense layer. The lattice staggered. Data streams desynced. Orders arrived out of sequence. The Dominion's greatest strength became its greatest weakness. Centralization failed. Threx felt something alien crawl through his thoughts. Regret. For the first time, he wondered what would have happened if the Dominion had listened instead of laughed. The first human shuttle struck the node's exterior and detonated, tearing open a wound in the structure. Energy vented into space. Shields flickered. More followed. Each impact widened the breach. Inside the node, systems screamed. Fleet coordination collapsed. Virex ships began firing without orders. Some collided. Others fled blindly. The Dominion's perfect machine was tearing itself apart. Lena's shuttle punched through the breach. Gravity failed. The interior was chaos, floating debris, burning consoles, alien figures scrambling in confusion. Humans spilled out like a force of nature, not soldiers but survivors. They didn't aim for control. They aimed for destruction. Explosives were planted by hand. Power conduits severed. Control cores shattered with brute force. The node began to die. On Earth, people watched the sky. They didn't know what was happening. They only saw alien ships falter, drift, fall. One by one, Virex vessels shut down or fled into deep space. The sky, so long filled with threat, opened. Silence followed. Then cheers. Then tears. Then something quieter. Relief. Commander Threx stood alone as the node collapsed around him. He accessed the final broadcast channel, overriding every system. The galaxy listened. To all who hear this, he said, voice stripped of authority. The Virex Dominion withdraws from Earth. He hesitated. Know this, he added. Humans are not weak. They are not obsolete. They are dangerous. The transmission ended as the node tore itself apart. Lena never saw the explosion. Her world went white. When she woke, she was on Earth. Alive. Against all odds. The war was over. Not because humanity was stronger, but because humanity refused to be predictable. Months later, the ships returned to harbor. What remained of them? The relics were scarred beyond recognition. Hulls patched with mismatched steel. Turrets frozen in place. Names barely visible beneath layers of soot and history. Crowds gathered anyway. Not tourists. Witnesses. Children touched the metal with quiet respect. Elders wept openly. No one laughed. These ships were no longer museums. They were monuments. Across the galaxy, something shifted. Worlds long silent began to speak. Empires paused. Conquerors reconsidered. Stories spread, not of Earth's technology, but of Earth's people. Of how they fought without permission. How they turned weakness into weapons. How they used relics not because they were old, but because they still worked. Humanity had not joined the stars as conquerors. They joined as a warning. Lena stood on the dock one last time, watching waves lap against battered steel. She felt older than she should have. Stronger too. Someone asked her what she thought history would remember. She considered the question. They laughed at us, she said finally. That was their mistake. The wind carried her words out to sea. Somewhere far away, among the stars, others listened. And they remembered.